on this computer. Right, we're good to go. So, hey, everybody, this is Nick McDonald here, and today my special guest is Patrick. So, hello, Patrick, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
Beautiful. So, Patrick is a HVAC business broker who sells HVAC businesses hand over fist. This year, so far this year in 2020, he's sold 5 or 6. He's probably sold about 15 to 20 businesses a year. Is that right? So
that's probably average.
Properly knows the market. He's got listings. He's got people trying to buy from him all the time, and people coming to him, selling to him all the time. So he really knows the market. So the reason I want to talk to him today is because I'm asked a lot, how much is my business worth? Right? And it's never as much as you think it is. Right? And,
yes.
And Patrick gets asked that question a lot as well. So it would be sensible to just talk about it. Just talk about the state of the market, what you need to sell your business, and etc. etc. So before we press record, Patrick and I were just chewing the fat a little bit. So if it's all right with you, Patrick, it might be sensible to just go over what we were just talking about.
Absolutely.
So we're just talking around about like the current state of the industry and the effect of COVID-19, or not, and stuff like that. So just share with us what we've just been talking about, what you were thinking around.
Absolutely. I think aside from, there's certain places, clearly New York City and other places, where they haven't been able to get out. They're not working. And so I think certainly businesses in those areas have been affected or been impacted worse than other areas. But I have, and how we started that part of the conversation, I probably have 13 companies listed for sale, and the bulk of them, probably 10 or 11 of them are either even with last year or up for last year. And because those companies are built on service, they're built on maintenance agreements, they're built on service and repair, not new construction. We've talked about that in previous conversations we've had, business built on service with maintenance agreements, with customer loyalty, with taking care of the customers, they're thriving during this time. I have one I sold last week and a half ago, Greenville, South Carolina. They were up 19% on the year because of maintenance agreements they had in place. They were a little behind on getting to the maintenance agreements, so they've had to pick and choose what's really an emergency call, how are they going to get their technicians in somebody's house safely, and so they've had to deal with those things. But the companies who've dealt with them and continued businesses, whatever's considered usual right now, have done fairly well.
Okay, beautiful. So a question that I'm asked a lot. So I'll just give you an example, right? I was speaking to somebody the other day, been in business 21 years, has about 600 or 700 maintenance agreements, is turning over about $800,000 a year, is looking to sell his business. And I said, well, what are you hoping for? He said, yeah, probably about 2 million. I was like, oh, right. Okay. So I don't know if that's, right now, if that's possible. So just let's just start at the top as far as selling. What is actually selling at the minute? I mean, is it like a mom and pop shop? Are they, the bigger businesses? What's the threshold for selling? If I'm only doing 200 grand a year, or if I'm doing 2 million a year, whereabouts, or is everything selling?
I can, a couple things on that. First off, I joke and I say, I get to tell everybody their baby's ugly on a daily basis, because most of small business owners, like myself, spent their entire life building their business. It's like their baby. So I get to come in and say, $2 million, that's not even close. And so they become angry with me, and I make a lot of enemies that way. But the reality is, I believe it's better for me to tell people the truth than to take a listing, put it out in the market, and it's never going to sell. And so I see that happen all the time. You'll look on various for sale by owner and even for sale with broker sites, and they'll have crazy numbers that a company who's doing $500,000 in sales and they've got it listed for $5 million. Well, nobody's going to buy that. I mean, mathematically, it doesn't make sense. There's so much out there that you could buy that you wouldn't do that. Back to your question about what's selling. Things that one, there's a separation from the owner from the business. So the owner's either not in the truck at all running calls, or the owner's limited in their time in the field. They're more of a manager or a general manager type of position. Companies that are focused on service. Buyers, the first question most smart, educated buyers ask is, how much risk is there in new construction? What percentage of the business comes from new construction? And that's something that they discount the business for immediately. Because oftentimes that new construction, one, it's either based purely on pricing. So you have the business because you're the cheapest guy in town, or two, it's a relationship that you have with the builder. Well, as soon as you sell that company, that relationship leaves. So a buyer translates that into no value to them. So those things, maintenance agreements, separation of service from the owner to the business. So they may be the name of the company and the face of the company, but they're not the ones who run all the service calls. Those are doing extremely well. And things with clean books. And so we're in a challenging time from a financing standpoint, although I think it's one of the best times really to buy a heating and air company, partially because of what the SBA is doing. They're making the first 6 months of payments for you. So in a 10-year loan, they're paying 5% of your loan for you, which is unprecedented in my opinion. And interest rates are at record lows. So I think it's a fantastic time to do it. But because of everything taking place, banks are becoming more strict in what they're willing to lend on. And so if your books are a disaster and they can't tell the profit from the personal expenses, it's going to be challenging for somebody to get financing for that. So those are kind of the three main things: built on service, separation of service from the business owner to the actual business themselves, and clean books. If you have those things, I can tell you that my phone rings off the hook all day. When the virus first hit, probably the first 2 weeks, it was like a ghost town. I was shaking my phone to make sure it was working. Nothing happened. Nobody called. No emails. I think everybody just kind of stuck their head in the sand. And now as we're starting to realize that there is going to be life after the virus, that everything's going to continue on, it's blown me away at the level of activity. I've worked 7 days a week for the last 3 weeks because I have appointments on Saturdays and Sundays as well, because I couldn't fit them in during the week. And there's that many people that are that interested in acquiring quality companies.
Wow. Okay. So is there like a limit to, like a bottom limit to, well, if you've got all of those things, but you're only doing 500,000 or 600,000, are they rich pickings, or is it?
No. The reality is where the bottom limit is from staffing. The hardest companies that I've had to sell the last 2 years has been single man shops or 1 and 2 man shops. So you're the entire business, and oftentimes that's not a business, it's a job, a very good paying job, obviously. I mean, working in this industry, a 1-man shop or a 2-man shop could do $300,000 or $400,000 in sales. So not necessarily from the sales figure standpoint, more of the employee count standpoint. Is there actually a business there to be purchased? Obviously, from a dollars and cents standpoint, they're only going to pay you what you're doing in profit. So if your numbers are low, you should anticipate a low check or a low purchase price. But they're still selling. I mean, that's not a problem, because whether it's a competitor, somebody looking at moving to the area, somebody expanding the area, there's always a strategic buyer somewhere. And I see a lot more competitors now that have realized that they can buy a company cheaper than they can market their way to a company. And so they're looking at acquisition even within their own town, simply because they feel that they've kind of saturated what they've done in mailings and other things, and they feel it's faster to buy a company, especially when you can finance it for 10 years with SBA, have very little money out of pocket, and pick up a company that's doing $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 in gross profit or gross sales per year, relatively easy, and put them right in their system. So to answer your question in a long drawn out version, I apologize for that, but no, not really. Not really from an income standpoint, more from what's the business built around. The 1-man and 2-man shops have been the absolute hardest to sell, and have sold for substantially less money than the sellers initially wanted.
Right. Okay. So if I was a 1-man guy, right, and actually no, if I was like I've had two or three trucks, and I had been the owner, and I've been using my business bank account like my own bank account, and I've been buying a boat out of the business, what I shouldn't have been doing, and I've just been taking money out but not showing it properly in the books, right? To recover that, that's quite a tricky thing to do. right? Number one. But also, how far back? So if I thought, right, actually now I'm on exit strategy and I want to get out. How far? Well, how long do I have to be honest? for want of a better expression.
The best number is 3 years, because typically a bank and a buyer is going to last for the last 3 years history. So if you're able to get the books cleaned up and keep them clean for 3 years, that's the ideal scenario. Oftentimes when people decide they're going to sell, and I've been there myself, I've sold my own business, and somebody I probably would have paid to take it at some point, but it's just when you're done, you're done. And so at least 1 year of clean tax returns. And the term we use is you can't get paid to steal twice. So you can't expect to cheat the government and save taxes, or however, be creative with your accounting. You can't expect to do that and then somebody pay you for that. And so if you decide it's more important for you to save taxes, then don't expect the buyer to come in and pay you for that boat payment, because that's the reality of what's going to take place. Somebody's only going to pay you what's provable, and the longer track record you have, the more believable it becomes. But the 3 years, depending on the size of your company, if a bank's going to request 3 years before they'd ever consider loaning on it. And so if you have to sit down with a spreadsheet to go back and add up all your personal expenses and how they tie into the business, and then proving those, it's going to be challenging for you to, one, find a buyer, and then two, once you do find a buyer to get it across the finish line. Because I think that's my job is really two parts. I believe part of my job is the marketing. So it's finding buyers, and we've been fortunate that now we've got a lot of buyers, and it seems that the buyer pool is getting bigger and bigger on a consistent basis. So that's half my job, is finding that person who says they want to buy it, and the other half is getting it across the finish line, because there's going to be due diligence. They're going to want to see bank records. They're going to want to see proof of things, and so I help in that process, because most sellers have never been through that before. And so I think that's kind of the other half of my job, and reality is probably the more important part of my job, is being able to get it from, we got it under contract, we have an offer, we've got it under contract, and now we've got to get it to closing. And those are the more stressful times, as opposed to just running a bunch of ads in places.
Sure. So what would you say is typical? Is it typically I come in, I have the initial look, yes, I'm interested, let's have I'm going to put my offer in, but my offer is dependent upon me combing through the books and me having a proper understanding of that business. From your experience, if my books aren't straight and all of that, is there a reduction in what I'm willing to pay?
Yes, absolutely. It has to be.
Yeah. And is so the first offer is never the final deal. And also,
I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry there. I try to eliminate that. That does happen from time to time, and we see it a lot with private equity groups that are coming in trying to get into the industry now. Is they'll come in and they'll make an offer, or giving us an LOI, letter of intent, and then they'll try to renegotiate once the process gets going. What I prefer to do personally is I want to give that buyer everything to make that decision. And so I want them to know all the numbers before they ever make an offer. Because if you as the seller agree to a price, and you know where the price needs to be for you to achieve your retirement or pay off your house or whatever those goals are that you've got, so you know where that bottom line figure is. If you accept their offer, wherever their first offer comes in, when they come back in the second time, chances are that relationship with you and them is not going to be very good. And so it's going to make for a challenging relationships. And I like it, because the reality is you're taking over my legacy. You're taking over my employees, my customers that may have been customers for 30 years. I want to get along with you. I want to see my business do well. I want to see you succeed. And if there's challenges in that relationship at the onset, it's going to just get worse over time. So my process, and I'll kind of do it briefly, is we run ads. Somebody contacts me, I make them sign a non-disclosure agreement. I make them give me financial verification that they're really a buyer, because this world, there's a lot of dreamers whose aunt and uncle is going to give them the money and all these wonderful things, and it never happens. So before I release any information, I want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You're not going to tell anybody, because I don't want employees, customers, or anybody else to know it's for sale. And then I also have you give me financial verification of that you're in a position to buy it, And then I give you a full packet or a full report on the business for you to take a look at. If after that point you still raise your hand and say, yes, I'm interested, then I set up a meeting. Whether it's on the phone or in person, depending on how far of a distance we're talking about. I set up that meeting because I think that the buyer and the seller, once again, need to get along, and I'd rather start that at the onset. Because if we have that meeting and you as the buyer, we walk out and you say, that guy's a jerk, I'm not buying his business. Let's know that now, not 3 months from now when we're trying to close and you have to work side by side with them. So I've lost some deals because of it, but I think long term, it's better for everybody involved. So I put the two of them together and I'm there. And so we answer questions. What do you need to know about the business? What do you want to see about the business? Let's look at the trucks. Let's look at the equipment. So when you make that offer, you shouldn't come back to me and say, I didn't know that they were creative in their accounting and now I want to change my price. You knew that prior to you making the offer. So the due diligence process is more just you verifying that everything we've told you is true and correct, and solidifies your offer. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So following on from that, if I want to sell you my business, do I have to stay in my business for a period of time and work with you side by side for a year, 3 months, 6 months, or can you give me the cash and I can then go to the Caribbean? What happens?
Yes and no. So I've had companies that we've sold that the day the sale took place, they took a picture in front of the sign for them to use for the marketing and they've never seen each other again. I've had others where part of the negotiation process is for you to stick around for 3 months or 6 months. I don't like sellers agreeing to stick around longer than 3 months. Because once again, back to this is their baby. They spent the last 30 years building it. It's run the way they want it to run, and they've been the owner, and they've made every decision. Now they're going to sit across the desk from somebody else who owns it now, and they're going to make decisions they don't like. And so it's challenging for somebody to watch their baby be run by somebody else in a way that you don't agree with, doing different things. So what I tell people, both buyer and seller, is you want them to stay, let's say for 3 months. At the end of 3 months, if we're all still friends and it still makes sense, great, let's stay longer. But if not, we can walk away and there's no hard feelings. Not because either side is wrong, just because how you run your business and how I'm going to run your business are two completely different things. And we're not going to want to sit and watch somebody else do that. So typically we normally offer in a transition 2 weeks. So if it's somebody in the area, within 2 weeks, you can introduce them to the supply house, your employees, get some things set up. Anything longer than that typically is negotiated.
Beautiful. Okay. So let's just recap, right? So first of all, maintenance agreements, service agreements, and customer relationship is key.
Huge.
Second one is clean books, understanding your numbers. And we'll come on to that in a minute. I want to expand that one slightly in a minute. But making sure that you declare everything, no cash under the table, all of that, it's all in. And then the third is get out of the truck if you're the owner, so that you
Absolutely.
have so that your business is a viable business with processes and systems and people set up to run those systems in your absence. Not you just being you are the business. And if you're a business owner and you haven't had a vacation for the last 10 years, you won't sell your business. Basically, you
don't have a business, you have a job. I mean, that's the reality of it. I think, and once again, a very good paying job. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from it. You could be one man in a truck and make 6 figures a year and do extremely well. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to come want to buy your job from you. And that's the reality of it.
Well, I mean, we've got people in our program doing $1 million. One guy did just under $1 million last year on his own. It looks like this, mind. Right? But he doesn't have a business, really. He's got a business name and all of that, but it
doesn't have a life either.
Well, I don't know. It is getting better now. So just round that. So I've got a few. This is an impossible question that you cannot answer, but I'm going to ask you. That's my job. So with maintenance agreements, does the value of a business go up proportionate to the number of maintenance agreements I have? If I have 100, does that make difference to 200, to 1,000, I mean, it must do, but could you put an amount on it as far as, you know, the multiples that you might get, etc.? You know, so less than 300 maintenance agreements would be X. More, you know, what's the desirable number?
Well, and that is an impossible question to answer. And part of the reason is because in relation to what your business is doing. If you're doing $3 million a year and have 100 maintenance agreements versus you're doing $3 million a year and have 2,000 maintenance agreements, that's a drastic difference. Every company that I've sold that has a high amount of maintenance agreements, over 1,000, every time we've run the report, whether it's in Service Titan or Service Fusion or any of these other reports, we've taken a look at how much of the income, of the overall income, came from those maintenance agreement customers. And every time we've done it, it's averaged between 85 and 95%. Huge amounts of revenue. So to answer your question in a vague way, yes, it does, because those people have been proven, in my opinion, in every study I've ever read, those maintenance agreement customers generate more revenue for the business than a non-maintenance agreement customer does. And so as a result, the overall profit of the business is going to be better, and it's more predictable, and it's repeatable. And so because of those things, it leads to a higher multiple. So I wouldn't say if you had between 100 and 200 maintenance agreements, that's going to make your business double, because that's not a reality. But if your business is focused on maintenance agreements, and if you have 4,000 active customers and 2,500 of them are on maintenance agreements, if you run the report yourself using whatever software, QuickBooks, whatever you're using, run the report and say, last year, what revenue was generated by those maintenance agreement customers? And I'm willing to bet it's going to be at least 85%. And so as a direct result, by building relationships, servicing the customers, spending more time in the customer's home, giving them more options from indoor air quality and everything else that a maintenance agreement allows you to do, it automatically generates more revenue for the business, so that multiple grows exponentially. Does that I know it doesn't give you a multiple, but does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. So what I'm hearing is maintenance agreements are good for business. Generally, we know that anyway. I mean, you're preaching to the converted. Although there is a very interesting discussion going on in the minute, which you may have seen, that maintenance agreements aren't worth anything. I'm like, what? But anyway, that's for a different day. So, okay, that's cool. My next question is around, I've got two more. So one is keeping your books clean. Now, a lot of that as well is how much does gross margin, matter? So if I am cheap, this is what I'm getting at. So if I price myself as cheap, but I'm still making a half decent margin because I'm on my own and my overheads are low, will I still get the same multiple on my net margin? How does that all work out?
A buyer is going to discount it, because especially if it's a strategic buyer that's already in the industry. Because the reality, if you're the low price leader, if you're the low price leader in town, and I'm a competitor in the next town over, and I want to come and buy you out, well, I have to know that half of your customers, or whatever percentage in my mind, because we won't know what the real figure is, but many of your customers are there because you're cheap, not because you're good, not because of quality, not because they like you, because you're cheap. And there's people who just like cheap, and that's part of it. When I come in to buy you and I raise your prices, if you're $60 an hour and I'm $150 an hour, the minute I come in and run that first call and it's $150 an hour instead of 60, I've just lost that new customer. And so those cheap people are going to go find the next cheap provider. It's a race to the bottom, in my opinion. And so those cheap people are just going to go find another company that's cheap. And so from a buyer's perspective, there's not going to be any loyalty, and they're not willing to pay you as much for it.
Quite right too. I always say that. So if you're a chuck in a truck, you're pricing yourself as if you have huge overhead. And
absolutely,
if your hourly rate is only two figures, then you need shooting. And
a buyer sees that, and that's the reality, because if I come to you and I'm planning on doubling the price, who's going to stay? And it's such a risk that why am I going to buy your company because you're cheap when I can buy another one down the street who's not cheap? And there's not going to be a big transition. And most of the buyers that are buying, I believe, are delivering more service than typically who they're buying out, oftentimes because of margins or size of company, or the seller's just done and just wants to get away and is not going to do anything new. So, and that buyer's looking at being proactive, but it comes down to dollars and cents as well. That buyer wants to be in a position to deliver better service to the customer. And if their margins are so small that they can't, those customers are going to leave.
Yeah. So it's folly, isn't it? It's folly. Yeah. Okay. Well, if you want to sell, that is. So, right. And then my last question really is, so we've been talking about things that aren't good. One is new construction is not good. The other one is don't be cheap. And then this is the interesting one, is small businesses tend to have a lot of family involvement as well. Mm. So if I've got my niece answering the phone and my son in a truck, you know, and my wife is doing the books, yada, yada, all of them receiving a bit under the table, etc. How does that affect my business? And affect the price of my business?
Great question. And I've never been asked that, but that's something I should talk about more, because on a questionnaire, when I send it out to a seller, I ask them what family members are there. And buyers ask that consistently, because here's, in addition to the money under the table, usually what happens is your son or daughter who hasn't found their way in life yet is getting paid way too much money to do a job they're not qualified for. Oftentimes they're the marketing expert, or they're in charge of dispatch, and they have no ability to do it, because it's your niece and you love her. She's making 80 grand a year when she should be making 20 grand a year. And so it skews the numbers. Second thing is when you sell, what are they going to do? So your wife's chances are is not going to stay. Your daughter's not going to stay. Your niece is not going to stay. So that buyer now looks at your business and says, well, there's 5 people there and 4 of them are family. What am I buying? And then the third part of that is, as they ask that same question, is, if it's such a great business, why aren't they buying it? And so it makes for challenging times, and it makes for difficult discussions that we don't want to have, because that's the real answer. If it's a great business and your family works here and can run it, and they're going to stay here and run it, why don't they buy it? And that's the first thing I would ask. If they're here, why aren't they going to take over? And then once again, it goes back to, they're going to leave. I mean, the reality is, when mom or dad sells, or aunt or uncle sells, it's not going to be the same. They're not going to be able to come in whenever they want to. They're not going to be able to bring their dog to the office and sit around all day long and not do anything. If I'm paying them, I'm going to expect to get an honest day's work out of them for what I'm paying them. And so from a buyer's perspective, it makes them leery. And what's going to stop each of those people from leaving and going to another company, and now the customers go with them? So now you start talking about non-compete agreements with family members, and it makes things way more complicated than you want them to be.
Okay. So there's quite a lot there to consider, right? So if I'm watching this and I've got a family-run business and my books aren't very clear and I don't have very many maintenance agreements, but I want to sell my business, let's just talk now, because I said that was my last question, but this actually is my very last question.
No worries.
Is what's kind of expected? I know it's very difficult. You can't go, oh, well, you know, it's 2 times the multiple for this, or it's 8 times the multiple, yada, yada, yada. A lot of business owners have an inflated value of their own legacy,
right?
Which is sometimes, 10 times more inflated than it needs to be.
Often.
Yeah. So what would you say? Let's just say that I've invested my time, I've got my books in order, and I think, right, well, I'm 60 now. I'm going to be 60. I want to retire when I'm 63. So I've got 3 years to get my books in order, to sort my maintenance agreements out, and to get rid of my family, if I can, out of there, and I'm going to get myself out of the truck. And I'm currently, my net is, I don't know, 10%, 15%. Let's just say I'm netting $100,000 a year, and I wanted to sell it now. What what's the expected multiple?
Typically, now I'm going to get in trouble for saying this because somebody's
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
call
you're
me
right.
and say that's not what you said. But so a ballpark, an extreme ballpark is 2 times what we call seller discretionary. Seller's discretionary earnings, and that's going to be the wages you take. That's going to be any add backs, and add backs are going to be things that we classify like depreciation, any interest you pay, or expenses that you have that if I own the company, I wouldn't have. So if it pays for your wife's car payment, and we can prove it with the bank statement, we see it going out, all those types of things. So your pay, any add backs on there, and then any profit at the end is going to be a total of seller's discretionary. So typically, an average we see is 10 to 15% is fairly average, is what that ends up being, and a 2-time multiple of that is going to be a good ballpark. Sometimes it's 2.5, sometimes it's 1.5, sometimes it's 3, depending on the market. But if you're looking just for a ballpark window, a 2-time multiple is good. As that figure goes up, though, that multiple starts going up. So if it goes from 100 to now it's 700 you're making, that seller's discretionary is 700, that multiple will start going up because now you start attracting a different, I'm going to say a different type of buyer. You become more attractive to private equity groups. You become more attractive to these bigger companies that are looking at acquiring stable companies in a specific area to get market share, and they'll pay a higher multiple for those. So when that net income goes up, then that multiple will. It's not necessarily dollar for dollar, but the closer you get to $1 million, the higher and faster that figure grows. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. So if I wanted to sell my business for $1 million, I got that in my head, right?
Yep.
What would I need to show in my books net profit?
500,000.
Okay.
With everything added up. So your paycheck, the profit of the company, and any of those add back figures, 500,000. If you're close to there, I'd feel comfortable you'd walk away with $1 million paycheck.
Beautiful. Okay. So thank you very much. So let's have a recap. I'll recap, see if I've been listening, and you can mark me out of 10. So top 3 things: service focused business with real relationships reflected in decent number of maintenance agreements. 2 is clean books, pay your taxes, bank the cash, stop messing about with your money.
Right.
3 is get the owner out of the truck, nobody on the tools, so that you've got a business to sell rather than a job to sell. They're the top 3. That's your basic criteria. If you don't hit any one, if you're missing any one of those 3, you can forget it largely. Things not to do: new construction. I'm not saying not to do new construction, but if you're looking to sell your business, new construction is not going to add any value to your business. Minimize family involvement if you can. That's always tricky.
Right.
And then don't be cheap. So that's 3 must do, 3 no do. So if I'm interested in talking to you, right, and you must, and again, what you don't want is a flood of people going, how much is my business? How much is my business? How do we get in touch with you then? Because your company is the Business Modification Group. So just tell us how we will get in touch with you if we're interested.
Absolutely. You can call me directly. My number is everywhere, but if you want to write it down, my number is 352-440-4604. That's 352-440-4604. That's my direct line. I believe selling your company is extremely confidential, and so the call goes directly through me. So if I'm on a call like this, I certainly won't be able to answer it, but I'll definitely give you a call back. Go to my website, businessmodificationgroup.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I try to put a lot of information out there. I do a blog post on my site as well. You can read articles. So I'm fortunate that we get published in ACHR News, HVAC Insider, HVACR Business. So several of the industry publications we're fortunate to get published in. But call me directly or email me. My email is directly on my site. It's patrick@businessmodificationgroup.com. So I'm open to talk anyway. And to be honest with you, I'd rather talk to you now if you were wanting to sell 3 years from now, so I can get you heading in that right direction, because most of the time people call me, they're ready to sell, which I love. Obviously, I'm in the business of selling heating and air companies, but they'll call me and they'll say, wow, I wish I would have known this 2 years ago. I wish I would have known this 3 years ago, but I'm done now. Whether it's illness, whether I'm just done, whether it's age. And so it's too late to do anything then. So please, if you have questions, call me, email me, text me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that I can. The industry, I love the heating and air industry. As you and I have talked in the past, I own a heating and air company myself. I believe in the industry. This is all I sell. I was a business broker, a general business broker for years, where I sold everything. And probably 3 years ago, I switched to just selling heating and air companies. I'm in the trenches every day. And so I think it's an incredible industry with an incredible future. And so anything I can do to help out, I'd love an opportunity to help.
Beautiful. Well, listen, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, and your experience, and certainly your knowledge of the market generally at the minute. So fairly, from what I pick up, if you've got a well-managed, well-run company, you should be able to sell it. It's a fairly buoyant market with loads of interest.
Absolutely. That's 100% accurate.
Yeah. So just out of interest, you've got how many, just top line number, how many people have you got on your books, registered buyers, who say to you, look, I've got the money, I'm ready to go, just tell me when something comes up?
I'm going to answer that in two parts. I have probably 2,000 people that have said that, that I have in my books, that I email listings out to regularly, that I stay in contact with regularly. I don't believe they're all buyers. I believe people dream of buying. I believe people think they want to be in business for themselves. I probably have, that I feel comfortable with, 400, that if I put the right business in front of them, they buy it right away. So the reality is, right now, I have more buyers than I do sellers for quality businesses. And so, it's an incredible time to sell, I think. And my recent articles talk about that. Buyers are coming out of the woodwork. People also that are not in the industry are seeing how valuable the industry is because of what's taking place with the virus. And so I think it's even created a bigger demand for the industry, which is great from somebody looking to sell standpoint. So we have plenty of buyers, just need quality businesses, and they'll sell.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's a good place to be. It's an essential service. So
Absolutely.
It's better than selling teddy bears, isn't it? I mean, this is so important. I mean, we were talking before we started recording, actually. You were saying that, the general American, your average American or your average person would rather give up, pool attendance, vacations, than sit sweating in a hot house.
Absolutely. And I said that's the reason I bought a heating and air company. I had it listed for sale, and I've owned multiple different companies in different industries, and we've made money and not had money like any other business owner. We've struggled at times, but we've always had cold air at my house, and there's a lot my wife will do without. She's not going to lay in the bed and sweat in the summertime. And I think most people are that way. And so that was what made me initially buy my company in the first place, was if you look at the things you're willing to do without during bad times, cold air is not one of them. And that's, and I believe that, warm air in the wintertime. I just think that's a reality that as a society as a whole, that's where we are. And that's a great thing for somebody who's in the industry.
Beautiful. Well, listen, we'll end on that. So thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.